Okay, we're now on Orlah, Perek Aleph, Mishnah Hey, fifth Mishnah in the first chapter of Orlah. We're going to talk about havracha, which means grafting. So in order to understand this Mishnah, we're going to read the Bartanura, which is a little bit long, but it's really a wonderful explanation. Says the Bartanura, Minhag ovdei avdama. There's a custom of the people who used to, he's talking about historically, people who worked agriculturally. Shechofrim guma, they dig a ditch. Velochim yichur echad min ilan. They take one branch from the tree. Let's for example use my thing, whatever, my headphone thing. They take one branch or one yichur echad, one, like, it's really a branch or a limb. V'nasa sham ilan. Okay, v'rosh yichur nishar mechubar ba'ilan. So if I've got my tree and I take one branch, I stick it in the ground. You can know this. I stick it in the ground, and then I let it grow out from the other side, and then this branch coming out from the ground becomes a new tree. Okay, so that's the way they would create secondary trees. The best way to grow a new tree isn't to take a plant. What they would do is they would take a branch, they would stick it in the ground, and they would come out of the ground, and that would be a second tree. The question is the second tree a new tree, or is it part of the old tree? Says the Bartanura, Ve'en din Orlah nohegbo. There's no din of Orlah, meaning it's not considered a new tree, as long as that growing tree that's growing out of the ground now, is connected to the old tree. Even though he's still, even though it's also drawing from the ground. Okay, but if the old tree then is uprooted, now I've got my tree and I got my branch, and then it goes into the ground, and now it's coming up. And now this tree, I don't know if it's being helpful, but it got uprooted. It's out of the ground now. And now it's connected, this is in the ground, and it's connected to the second tree. So, im ne'akar ilan hazaken min hakarka. V'nimtza, and it turns out, shekol chiyukto v'yinikato ata min habrecha. So its sustenance, now the dad tree, the old tree, is now living off the young tree. Chazra hazkeina liot kevrecha. Then the old tree becomes like the new tree. I mean, the new tree now, it's now both of them are young, because now the old tree is now living off the young tree. Okay? Ushnehem, and both of them, hazkeina v'habrecha, the old tree, the papa tree, and the baby tree, haviki'ilu nit'u ata, as if they're planted right now. Umonim lehem shalosh shanim, misha shenekar ha'ilan. And you have to start counting 3 years, because it's now, if I have my original tree, and then I dug it in the ground, we're going to see, assuming, I know it's hard to envision. It's in the ground, and now I have the second tree is growing, okay? So now this tree gets uprooted. So both trees now are as if they were both planted, because now both of them, this one is now considered like a newborn tree, and this one is considered like a child of the tree that it was a father of. Sounds like a bad riddle. We're going to see this now in the Mishnah. This is exactly what the Mishnah is saying. With that introduction, he introduced it beautifully. He explains the following. Ilan shene'ekar, a tree that was uprooted, ubo brecha, and it has a graft, meaning, what's not a graft, but it has a sub-tree that was grown from it, v'hu chaya mimena, and now the daddy tree is now living off of the baby tree, chazra zkeina liot kebrecha. Then the zkeina, the new tree, is now the same age as the young tree, the baby tree, just like the baby tree was just born now, because the older tree is now gone. Now the old tree now, its halachic din is now like the age of the young tree, and you only have to count 3 years. The Mishnah continues. Habrecha shana achar shana. Okay, so now what happens if you did this one after the other? You did one tree, and then it had another headphone, and then you did another tree, and another tree. Every year, it grew up another tree, and then you took another branch and did another tree, and you took another branch and another tree. Vinifsika, and then it gets cut off, of course, from the original tree. Moneh misha shenifsika. Then you begin counting the age of all the sub-trees. Remember, because as long as they're originally attached and they're getting sustenance from the original tree, then they're considered like offshoots of the original tree. You don't have to worry about Orlah. One gets the sense strongly that this is one way they avoided Orlah. Okay, so there's a whole like Torah of grafting on the internet. The rabbit hole goes very deep. But there's a lot of reasons why they would graft. One of the main reasons they would graft is because grafted trees produce fruit much more quickly. So the whole point is, if you produce fruit quickly, you want to be able to use them. So therefore they would graft on, and then it's the age of the old tree. And that's exactly what they would say. Okay? Therefore, but if it gets cut off from the original tree, moneh misha shenifseka. Sipuk agfanim. Sipuk agfanim is exactly the same thing. Let's look at the bar tenura. Sipuk agfanim. Derech ovdei adama is the way of the farmers. Shalochim zmora aruka. They would take a long vine, migefen zo, from one vine. Umoshchin oto legefen shebetzida. And you would like sort of draw it like a line to the next vine next to it. Umar kivin zmura bagefen. And then they would graft this vine onto the new geffen that was growing. Sipuk. Sipuk means to give sustenance. Upatur min ha'olah. So I just planted a new vine, but I want it to grow better, I want it to grow faster. So I take a vine from an already mature vine and I connect it and I graft them. Okay, so that means the new vine now is not 0. You don't have to count to 3 years, but rather you just get connected to the old line, to the old vine. So that's what the Mishnah says. Sipuk agfanim. If I attach one new vine from the old vine, v'sipuk agabe sipuk, and I just connect a daisy wheel of vines from one to the other, af al pi shivrichan ba'aretz, even though I drag them through the ground and they're getting some sustenance from the ground, because remember I took the vine, stuck it in the ground, and then connected it to the next vine, mutar. That's okay. That's still considered like the new tree is the same age as the old tree. Rabbi Meir, remember, qualifies this and says, makom shekocha yafeh mutar. If the koach, the power, let's look at the Bartuner for a second. Makom shekochva yafeh, imaz mora, shivrichuha bagefen kocha yafeh, v'yonka min hagefen asher mimenu lakha. Meaning, if the sustaining vine, the connecting vine is strong and it's passing over sustenance, then mutar uptura min ha'orlah. Meaning, the whole point is, if the connection from the old vine to the new vine is strong enough and it's passing through sustenance, and it's considered like they're all part of the old vine. Mutar, it's okay. But if the connection is bad, and obviously it's not producing, it's not connecting, it's not transferring sustenance, then asur, then it's prohibited. Last point in the Mishnah. Let's say I have a grafted from an old tree to a new tree. Shenifsika. And the new tree is now, the lifeline is cut. So now it's as if the new tree is now born 0. Okay, but it's vihimile aperot. It's full of fruit. So since it's full of fruit, all the fruit that grew until now was mutar. I didn't have to take off Orlah. I didn't have to count 3 years. So all those fruit, if they're ready, if they're edible, I can pick them and eat them. Why? Because they grew, they're really the children, the fruit of the old tree that it was connected before it got cut off. So says the Mishnah, but im hosif b'matayim, if you leave it on the tree to the point where it grows 1/200th, asur. Why 1/200th? Because this is another halakha that's very important. One of the halachot of Orlah is it's batel b'matayim. It's not like truma that's batel chad b'meya. It's batel chad b'matayim. It's similar to klai hakerem. Okay, in klai hakerem, if there's klaim if you have klaim of the vine, if you planted, let's say, wheat and grapes together, that's also batel chad b'matayim. So that's what the Mishnah says. Im hosi b'matayim. If it grew 1/200th or 1, so now you have 199 to 1. So you have 199 of mutar to now orla. Then the fruits themselves are asur. So you have to be careful that if the lifeline from the old tree to the new tree gets cut, pick your plants right away. Otherwise, the fruit is asur. We'll stop here. Somewhat of a long Mishnah. Email me at arspolter@gmail.com if you have any comments or questions. We'll dedicate a learning to the memory of my father, Rav Simcha ben Yitzchak Kalman. Have a great day.